There is a lot to talk about here. We're going to cover the motor, the clutch, the geometry differences in the bike, the leverage over this thing, weight distribution, how that's going to affect your body position on the bike, and a hell of a lot more. This is a review of the Beta Sincro. It's taken me a little while to get around to doing this, but being in Australia, the guy with probably the most experience on a Beta, having ridden them since 1996 all the way through to only a couple of years ago, a number of people have been messaging me and asking me, hey, what do you think of the Sincro? So it's taken a while. You know, we live here in Western Australia, which means that we get bikes. It takes us ages to get everything. Everything's late to Perth, which means I'm testing out the 2022 model Beta Sincro. But so finally I thought I'll chuck a video together and we'll talk about it in depth. Now, it's taken me ages to have a proper opportunity to sit down and properly ride. We've been busy as hell. So I got a really good solid hour a couple of days ago. And then since then I've had a play around this morning a bit further. Now there is more testing I'd love to do, but I thought I'll chuck all my thoughts down now. Now, first up, a couple of disclaimers, okay? We own a motorcycle store and we sell Beta, Gas, and Sherco and Osset. And obviously you can allow for whatever bias there is in whatever you perceive the bias to be. So that is there. And now I'm not sponsored by anyone whatsoever. And Beta haven't paid for this or anything. It's literally just because people keep asking me, really. And I do have a soft spot for Beta. I rode them for so long. And Lapo and the team helped me out when I was in Europe in ways you couldn't imagine. But at the same time, I've been riding Gas for the past 4 years, and there was a reason why I jumped across to the Gas. I really wanted a better clutch. And really that was the only thing I really wanted for one of a reason. But since then I've jumped on the Gasser and I've really got comfortable with it. But it took me nearly 2 months to get used to that. It took me quite a long time to get used to the Gas, specifically the clutch. But before I go into that any further, I want to kick off with the first major point, and that is the motor. Every throttle rider who jumps on this bike is going to say straight away, this bike has no power. It's soft. Off the bottom, it is very soft. If you're riding around just cracking the throttle when you're only using the throttle, you're going to feel there's a lack of torque there at that bottom end. Now, the Betas have never been hyper aggressive off the bottom. They're not that way inclined. Beta tend to build bikes for the average rider, for the normal rider, the vast majority of the community. So they don't necessarily build a hyper aggressive bike, but you know, two strokes are pretty simple machines. All the bikes in the paddock basically have the same dimensions. There's not much, and if you are an expert level rider, you can bring them up to spec quite easily. But the Betas have always had torque underneath that. Like, it would be at low RPM, they'd just chug. And if you went all the way back to the two-stroke Montesas, they were the same. At really low RPM, they'd pull out of pretty much anything. And in a similar way to what the Vertigos are nowadays. And they would really pull, but this is very soft. There's just that torque lacking, but it's right at the bottom, right at the very bottom of the rev range. And the second that you come up above that, there's actually a lot, and it's actually really solid beyond that point. Now, when I first read that they were going to be barrel inducted, not crankcase inducted, that was my first thought, was I'm expecting they're going to lose bottom end. Now, I don't really know a great deal. I've spent all my time dealing with crankcase induction and not barrel induction, and I'm not exactly an expert in two strokes, but I was expecting them to be soft, and it is. It's pretty much what I expected. But there's a bit more to that, which I'll cover in a minute. I'll come back to, and I don't think it's as bad as what you initially think when you get on and you feel that. Amongst the field of all the other bikes, your Gasses and your Shercos, for example, are, in my mind, for the average rider, too aggressive off the bottom. They're quite snappy and aggressive. And this is kind of the other way. It's very soft. Now, I'd really love to see how this bike would differ with like a longer header or a couple of things to just draw out more of that bottom end. It'd be really interesting to see if I had a Bozzy pipe on it or something like that. So Michele, get your butt into gear and make us some pipes. But if I was going to be riding this long term, I would definitely make some adjustments to it, but I am riding the expert level, but I will come back to this in a minute. Now, the mid to top end is epic. It's really good. Once you get it off that bottom, it actually really pulls well. It's nice and crisp. It actually does the job really, really well. If you're a rider who's a little bit quicker in sections, you won't notice anything. For those who are real slow and 100% on the throttle, you're going to feel it. You're not going to like it, to be honest. Now, that's the motor as a general rule. Now, the clutch is hyper quick. It is really fast out of the box. So I've set the clutch to the slower setting in the cases, and then I've also moved the clutch lever all the way to the bend in the handlebar, so I'm way out on the end of the lever. And out there, it feels really, really good. It feels fantastic. Now, I was really unsure about how this clutch would go in the Trolls bikes. They are basically identical to what's in the Enduro bike. The slave cylinder has some different, different castings. There's some different shape to it, but it's only a minor one around where the banjo bolt goes in. So I'm assuming they're the same slave cylinder, but they could be different because it looks a little bit different. But I've ridden with them on the Enduro bikes and they work really well, but it has that extra mass and the extra power it's dealing with. When you lighten everything up, I was wondering how the feel would be. That was my biggest concern. I expected it going to the diaphragm to feel good and be quite predictable where the engagement point is. I expected it to also reduce the drag, which it 100% has. The drag in this is way, way, way less. I mean, they've all got a touch, and this has a touch, but it's way better and much better than the old clutch, which would just drag something chronically. Now, the thing that spun me out the most was its predictability, and this actually struck me because when I was here training on it for that hour, I hadn't really been riding bikes for a few weeks properly. I haven't spent much time on the bike, so when I got on a different bike after a few weeks not riding, I didn't feel confident in myself. I felt like this is going to be a bit messy, so I'll take things carefully. But then when I went and had a crack at a splat wall that I normally ride on, what I noticed was that every single attempt, I actually hit at exactly the same point. My tire marks on the ground were like millimeter accurate, and the marks on the wall on the actual step itself were millimeter accurate. But I didn't feel that. I was feeling unconfident and uncertain and thing, but every attempt I hit the same point, and very quickly, only within about 3 or 4 splats, I immediately felt comfortable that I was going to do it and confident. I still felt a bit uncertain being off the bike and jumping from the gas to the Beta, because last time, like I said, when I went from Beta to gas, I reckon it took me 2 months to adapt to that diaphragm clutch on them. So going from that clutch to this, and the gas clutch is the best in the paddock, it's epic. So jumping to this, I thought, oh, you know what, I'm going to have some trouble adjusting to this. You know, it's going to take some time, but it really struck me how confidence inspiring it was, and I got really comfortable with it quite quickly. The feel on the clutch I think is great, but like I said, I've slowed it down dramatically. So, and it's still in that position, it's still quite aggressive, but it's quite rideable. If you've ever taken the gas clutch to the fastest position, I forget which number it is, but if you take it to the fastest position and tried, it's excessively aggressive. It's hyper aggressive, and you struggle to get the feel out of it. This is like kind of halfway between 3 and 2 on the gas, but when you do slow it down, there's that feel to it, and it worked really well. I felt great on it. And that was in all settings, like when things were slippery on some off cambers, I could feel, when I was splatting, that was the bit that spun me out the most, is the rear felt utterly planted. Like, I was so certain in the traction on that rear tyre that when I let the clutch out, there was no fear or concern whatsoever. But this is also in relation to geometry changes on the bike, which I'll cover in a moment. Now, I personally think that you'll want to slow the clutch down. You'll probably, for some riders, they're going to want to go slower again. So in the future, this may mean a slave cylinder diameter change or something like that, or a master cylinder change, just to take that edge off the bike a bit further. If you get on a bike in the stock positions, you're going to feel like, oh, this is too aggressive, it's too sharp. Some riders, there's a couple of riders who've tested out our 200 and a couple have ridden the 300 and they've said, wow, it's really powerful. And then others who are just riding the throttle, they don't use the clutch, are like, this thing's gutless, if you know what I mean. So some people were saying it's too powerful because that clutch was so aggressive. So if you keep that in context, that motor doesn't have the torque off the bottom, but the clutch is hyper fast from stock. Now, the next part is the front end. The front end on this bike is so light, really, really light. And the leverage on the bike, due to whatever they've done with that change in weight distribution, is epic. I can lever this bike so well, and the height that I was getting on my Splats was unreal. On the Gasser, on the Betas, I would never have been able to splat that high in the past. I was comfortably splatting higher than my gas pretty much immediately, pretty much straight away. Now, you can feel that when you're levering off the ground, it's not like you have this weight out in front of you. So everything with a gas lineage has that front wheel's just that little bit further out. So when you are levering and you're smaller and lighter, it's just that little bit harder to do it. And this just allows you to really pull through it really well, and you don't have that extra weight out there. So for the riders who are lighter weight and have shorter arms and legs, this is going to make a big difference. Now, I, for one, have historically struggled with that because I'm not very strong. You know, my chicken arms and legs struggle to really lever the bike heavily. The heavier riders are not going to notice the difference. But then because of this lighter front end, there's a slight shift in your body weight. So you're just that little bit further forward. So if you're someone that is a little bit weaker in the legs and you don't have strong legs, you ideally want to be forward. If you're a rider who doesn't have the strong legs and you're riding very straight leg to avoid working the quads, and you just back that little bit on the bike, you're going to feel that's very floaty on the front. It'll be very light. Now, I'm a tall rider, and so being on the gas always kind of felt comfortable because I could sit back and just relax the legs and keep the knees fairly straight, and I've got the long arms for it. But at the same time, when I'd go to lever, I'm not really that strong rider, so that front wheel being that bit further out just made it heavier. This feels incredible, honest to God. It feels like a splatting cheat code. So I really, really like that. There's absolute certainty in the rear tyre. You feel heaps and heaps of traction, really good clutch control, and just really inspires confidence in it. Now, this is where I feel that lack of bottom end may not be as bad as what we think. Now, within my riding, normally sooner or later, I make a mistake and I struggle to pick the front up. You know, I've shot in somewhere, I've made an error, and the front's a bit low and I need to pick it up. So far, in about 2.5 hours of riding, I haven't had that moment where I would be relying on the torque. Ben Walling's had a couple of hours on it as well, and I asked him about it, and he didn't feel like he'd had any point where the front would drop. So I think that potentially that change in weight distribution means you're not so reliant. You don't need as much torque to pull out of that. But regardless, I'd still be searching for some more off the bottom. Now, for riders who are like sub 80 kilos or shorter arms and legs, I think you're really going to love the leverage feel over the bike. The best part is that you can get the leverage without having to sacrifice stability. When you really roll the bars dramatically forward to increase the leverage, you'll tend to lose the steering stability on the bike. It feels like it's more like overcoming a fulcrum when you turn the bars rather than steering nicely. So I don't feel like you need to roll the bars dramatically forward. and still get the same outcome. That's still the improvement over the bike. The Betas have always felt to have a longer stroke on the back end of the bike. If I would jump onto a Sherco or a Beta or anything, Sherco or a Gas, anything with that Gas lineage, they would have a very short back end, which makes them great for point loading the bike, fantastic for splatting and whatnot. Now it still feels like it has that long rear end, but it still feels really planted. And the back wheel will drive through things well. That's what I always loved about the Beta compared to the others, is that they would drive through things in the way that the Montesa would. Like you'd ride through a series of big lumps and horribleness, and the back would just stick to it all and drive through it really cleanly and calmly. And they've retained that feeling. And in the past, that feeling used to sacrifice some of your splat ability, because it was with the shorter stroke, you could get to the bottom of the stroke and your leverage would be applied to the ground. Where this now, with that change in weight, the bike feels way better for that splatting, and you can feel the shock firm up, but it firms up to a position where there's something left in it rather than being completely bottomed. So driving through things when I've mucked around with it has been fantastic. The bike really sticks and drives. Yeah, I really like that aspect of it. Now, the Betas have always been known for their turn ability. They've always been very, very easy to turn. That steeper rake on the front of the bike, the greater steering lock, being light generally on the front. This I expected to be more tucky than the old Betas used to be, but it's not as bad as I expected. I thought it was going to be worse. I actually feel like it's a little less tucky than what the Betas used to be. I find that this is a fantastic rear wheel bike. Now, I know that plenty of you are going, hey, I don't ride on the back wheel and blah, 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 or, you know, I'm old school, I don't ride on the back wheel, whatever. The reality is we all do. Trials is a rear wheel sport. It's all about putting your weight on the rear, and the front wheel is essentially a rudder, and we use it to steer. And the old school stuff where you're floating, front wheel floating turns and whatnot, just feel amazing. The big problem is though, you've got to adapt to your new body position. You really, because it's light on the front, you actually need to be forward and potentially down a little bit more than normal, or put the front wheel lower. So there's a rock we have here which is angled, and we normally ride it on the back wheel and jump a gap and this and that. And to ride up that, normally I would have to have on the gas of the front wheel that bit higher, because there's that extra weight in the front. So I can't hold it low. If I was to hold it low, I'd have to really counterbalance dramatically with my body. With this, I could just sit the front wheel low and I could ride up from that position. So I had the option of either shifting forward or lowering the front. Now, it felt fantastic in that. And when you would steer the bike, when you would turn amongst the rocks, you'd deflect off things and it would oversteer on you. Because it's so light, I'd just spin right around and miss my mark. And that probably took me half an hour to 40 minutes to start to get a feel for it, to be honest. It took quite a bit to get the feel for. Because the front's so light, when you ride into rocks and you want to deflect the front, like if you're going to float and carry the front from rock to rock, it's very deflecty. Like it'll hit things and it'll deflect off. I'd probably want to make the fork valving a little more two-stage. So it's very light on the early part, and then the faster, heavier hits is you would want the damping that's there. It's totally fine. But that very lightweight, low speed movement at the very initial part of the fork, it's just a little bit too heavy to me to what it feels on the bike. I'm a lightweight rider. It might just take a little more direction into the rock, a little bit more weight forward to make the fork work rather than just expecting it to work. But I did back the forks off as far as they would go, which is what I would normally do anyway. And then it started to feel a little bit better. But without it, it was very deflecty. And if you had the front turn dramatically and the contact patch was really offset to the steering position of the bars, you would feel that tuck again. And it would happen. And that's something that I used to be used to, but now I'm not. So if you are jumping across to a Beta from another brand, you're going to feel that when you're float turning and punching off stuff. But once you adapt to that, it'll really turn exceptionally well. So what I don't like, probably the biggest thing that I don't like is actually the rear brake. I feel like the stock rear brake lever actually sits out just too far. And when you're trying to move your toe around the rear brake, I must have caught it 5 or 6 times. I would splat or ride up a step or whatever, and my toe would go past the rear brake, and then as the front would come down, my toe was caught under the rear brake. So I actually would like to shorten the toe on it. It feels quite protected where it is, but I really think it wants to come in closer. It really feels like it's kind of like halfway out. It's like directly in front of your foot peg. It's incredible for the feel and whatnot, but like many riders will want to take our toes past the rear brake, and at times, and I just want it in so I don't keep catching it. That was probably my biggest bugbear of them all. Secondly, I would still personally want some more torque on the bottom. I'd like a little bit more just to pull out when I make those errors. It's really error correction. When you're riding correctly and you're not making the errors, I don't feel I need any more. But it's just to pull me out of those moments when I stuff it up. So what I haven't tested so far, I would like to test longer gaps with shorter run-ups. I'd also like to test it on more turning into things, so powering and driving into stuff and hill climbs. We live in Perth, WA. We don't have a great deal of hill climbs. Really, I don't think there's going to be a problem with it, but I do feel that you're going to need to make adjustments in body position. That's going to be the biggest thing for other riders, is learning where that position is to be able to apply the power. Is it too light on the front? I don't think so. I think it's just going to take that adjustment. I would also like to do some more refined work on the clutch, playing with it in more extreme situations where I'm consistently climbing upwards, but I don't expect it to be much worse than that. I just haven't tested it there, so I really don't know. I would like to play more with the rear shock. Now, the rear shock to me actually feels fantastic for the stock bike. Now, it's not set for my body weight yet, which would be great to change, but apart from that, it actually really sticks and plants really well. Given that that's the stock R16V or whatever they are, it perfectly does the job. I'd be happy to ride with it as it is. To me, to summarize what I feel about it, is the bike is a diamond in the rough. I feel so much potential in it. I'm actually quite excited about it. I'm riding the gas for this year, but look, I love it when any of the manufacturers make a progression and go in a direction and do something different. This feels like Beta have, because we've had the same bike for a long time, I feel like Beta have made a move in the right direction for them. It's going to take some refinement. I feel like with a bit of personalization, it'll really draw out the potential in the bike, and a little bit of time to adapt to it. Ben was riding here yesterday and he was really taking to it well, so that was great to see. Like I said, I'd look for a touch more bottom end. I love the clutch the way it's sitting currently with mine, but I would also like to see some adjustment to make it slower again. That way everyday riders have that available to them. For new riders, I like the clutch to be really slow for them. Then I would just ride it and adapt to how it is, and just give myself time to adapt to that body position. If you're coming off any other brand of bike, it's going to be quite a bit of adaptation to learn that position to where you really need to be on the bike. And when you do, I think it'll really pay dividends. Throttle riders, if you're just riding on the throttle, you're going to find that motor dead flat. You'll be like, this is really flat. Clutch riders, once you rev it just a touch, even the slightest amount, and then start doing everything on the clutch, it drives beautifully. Mid to top end, when you're really revving it hard, it goes fantastic. I think all riders are going to want to slow the clutch down, and anyone who is riding on the back wheel or likes that old school floaty turny sort of riding, you're really going to love this thing on the back wheel. It's going to be planted and really solid. So that's all of my review. Let me know what you think. If this was of any assistance to you, or if you have any other questions, chuck them in below. Don't guarantee I'll answer them, but I might have a chance to respond to them. Other than that, hope you get out on your bike and have some fun.